So the title of this session is Best Practices in Promoting Your Drupal Code and Database Between Environments. It's a little bit of an entry-level fundamentals session. So if you start getting bored and you know what all the Git commands are and you're an expert, I won't feel offended if you leave. Effectively, what I think best practices and fundamentals are going to be giving you is the ability to avoid the fail whale, because breaking is equal to bad. Anytime you break anything, whether it's in live or in not so live environments, it's usually a bad thing. I'm Ivan. I work at 10.7, and I have been playing with computers and writing code and been interested in operations for a very long time. That's an actual picture of the first computer I ever had that I still have in my basement. It's a Sinclair ZX Spectrum 48K. And the first... All right.
One of the new models.
That was one of the new ones, actually, you're right. And the first language I ever learned was GW Basic, and the keyboard was awesome because it had the commands go to, if, then, all on rubber keys, and instead of typing out if, then, or typing out go to, you just press one button, and it types it out for you. So that was really great. It's true. I really like DevOps. I like the dev side, I like the ops side, and part of that is because I'm a little anally retentive and I like to control things. And so, best practices in trying to get code from one environment to another, it appeals to me. I work with some really amazing people. Some of them are sitting over there. And we have a lot of fun at 10.7, and sometimes we sit around one computer watching kitty videos, and sometimes we do actual work. Sometimes things break, and you've all probably been around when a site breaks or your computer breaks. Sometimes it's our own fault for doing that. These are errors that we have on a site, and those are names that belong to our team. Can you tell what site it is?
I can tell I'm not on this.
You can tell.
Just, I am on there.
Alexis Blogger right over there. So sometimes we're the cause of things that break. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes there's large amount of traffic and there's 3 million page views on a site and there's a spike and hey, our site's down and it wasn't our fault, but it broke. And usually when I break things, it's typically because I'm doing it somewhere on a live site somewhere. I try not to do changes on a live server. It's burnt me many times, and that's pretty much why I'm here giving this presentation, because I don't want you guys to get burnt. Most times, if you're doing reasonably simple and fundamental things like using Git and using it in a production environment, you can recover. And so when you're on a site and you're in the live public HTML file folder and you kind of delete all the files that are in the system because you thought you were somewhere else, maybe you thought you were local. If you have Git, one easy command and hopefully all those files come back. This is just a demo, so I didn't actually delete something. But not always. You're not always able to recover. So I'm not going to be able to guarantee that you won't lose things, but if you follow these general principles, most of the time you should be fine. So there are 3 things I'd really like you to take away from this. Git is your friend. Forget about FTP. Forget about secured FTP. Forget about pulling files by dragging them over into different environments. Do yourselves a favor. Use Git. It's not as hard as you think it might be. The second thing is separate environments. Don't rely on only one location. Have separate environments, whether it's your local machine, a staging site, a QA site, a live site. That's 4 different environments. At 10.7, we try to keep it simple. We have 2 environments. We have a preview and we have a live. And preview is typically always a mirror image of the latest commit in Git. And then the third thing is features, Drupal 7 features. It's a great module. You should read up more about it if this piques your interest. I do have some links in the presentation that you can follow. It's an amazing module that takes all the things that aren't in files, that are in your database, that are configuration things, and it tries to extract those and put them in files so that you can version control them and use Git to do that. So those are the 3 things that I'd really like you to take away. So Git is your friend, remember different environments, and the features module. So let's talk about Git being a friend. You've probably all seen Octocat and different iterations of Octocat. And you probably all know or think that GitHub and Git is the same thing. Git is not GitHub, if you've heard of GitHub, but GitHub is Git. And Beanstalk is Git. And Bitbucket is Git. And what is Git? According to Wikipedia, Git is a distributed revision, control, and source code management system with an emphasis on speed, data integrity, and support for distributed nonlinear workflows. And so really, Git is revision control. And I highlighted this so that the green would stick out and revision would be, first and foremost in your mind. But when I was reviewing the slide with Lex, I noticed that Git is control is actually also highlighted. And both those things make a lot of sense because Git is control. It gives you the ability to go backwards in time if you screw up. It gives you the ability to separate environments. And I'll talk about that later, but I usually think of environments as branches in Git. But at the same time, Git being control, it's also revision. Because if I make a change to a file and I commit that change, I know what that change was and I can go back to the previous revision by undoing that change. And so this is very simple and understandable to me, and hopefully to you. Git keeps track of changes in text files. So really what Git is doing is it's keeping a list of all the changes that happen in all of the text files in your Drupal installation. It's really good at doing that. It really works well with text files. It's not so good with images. It's not so good with databases either. But when it comes to text files, which is 99% of the code base, you're pretty good. If you're afraid of Git, you can try to use a GUI like Tower on Mac or something else. In my humble opinion, Git at the command line works the best. And the reason for that is you're able to make those commits and make those atomic changes to those files the way you want to. And I think there really isn't anything to be afraid of. And I don't remember why I had the screenshot in here, but I think it was me doing a Git clone. So here are some commands you should probably memorize. Git status, git add, git commit, git log, git checkout, git push, git pull, git merge. There are some others like git clone and git branch and rebase and so on, but these are the fundamental ones you should probably know when you're working on your own local machine and you're trying to share your code with others. So let's go through just kind of what the way I think of them in my mind and how they're grouped in my head. So git status, git add, and git commit in my mind are all together because I use them at about the same time, and I use them typically in the same place, and it's where I am in the command line, either on a local machine here on my Mac or on a Unix box somewhere in an environment, either our preview environment or a live environment. What does git status do? Basically it says, what's going on? are all my files accounted for, or do I have some new changes to files that I need to account? Git add, if you run that command, you're basically saying, see these changes that I made? I'd like you to put them in a holding pattern in the staging area because I'm thinking of making a commitment to them. I'm going to maybe add some other changes, and once I've got all these files that have these changes that I'm really in love with, I'm going to make a commitment to them, and I'm going to ask Git to remember them. And so effectively what you're doing is you're saying, hey, what's different? Oh, these files are different. Let's add the ones I want into this holding pattern. This maybe constitutes a bug fix or a feature change or something like that. And then when you run git commit, it packages those and it turns it into a change set and it accounts for them. And typically you're doing this locally. The other two commands I think about together are git log and git checkout. Git log tells me what happened. So if I run git log on a Git repo that I just cloned, that I just brought to my own machine, that perhaps someone else has been working on, I can run git log and I can see what all those other messages were that other developers entered into Git and what those files were that they changed. Git checkout I think of as kind of an undo, especially when I've deleted files, but it's also used in branching. So when I check out the master branch, I'm really switching to a different commit in the Git history, but it's effectively taking me to a point that's in a different branch, that's a different stream of commits. And then there are the other three that I had listed on that first slide: git push, git pull, and merge. And push basically says, take all of the commits that I've made that haven't been pushed to a central repo or to the central location where all my code is, and send them there. Git pull does the opposite. It brings back any changes that are in that central location onto my machine. If you're in an environment where there's more than one developer working on some code, you should probably be pulling and pushing as often as you can. Because if you wait for a day, or 2 days, or 3 days, and you haven't pulled in a long time, other people have beaten you to commits in the repo, and those change sets, when they become really big, they're really hard to reconcile with changes that you've made. And so the more often you pull and the more often you bring those change sets home to your local machine, the better off you are, the better able you are to resolve any conflicts that you might have with lines of code you've written. And the way I think of git merge is in the classic yoga sense. It's a way of bringing together different branches. And so when we are in production on the master branch, and we've done some development in the developed branch, and we want to bring those things that we're ready for, that we've identified as something that we want to bring to the live site, we switch to or check out the master branch, and then we merge all of those changes from develop into master, and that becomes a commit. And if everything goes according to plan, you get a success message, and when you push, you end up with all of your changes in the master branch. So these two links you should look at. One is general Git documentation about on the Drupal.org website. And the other one, this one that has 803.746 node number, building a Drupal site with Git, gives you a whole lot more info on how you can use Git in your own workflow. So just in summary, the way we do it at 10.7 and some other workflows have it a very similar way is we have a central repo, a central location, our own server where all of our Git repos are. Each repo is typically a project. Sometimes there's more than one project per client, but everybody has access to the central repo so that everybody can pull that code and everybody can contribute to that code. We try to do as many small commits as we possibly can. We try to put things together into I don't want to say features because that'll confuse with the slides later on, but in chunks of code that make sense. push and pull often so that you don't run into the problem of having huge change sets. And think about merging as promotion. And what do I mean by promotion? I really mean changing environments. We have a very simple 2-branch workflow that works for us. We think of the develop branch as the thing that is actively being contributed to. It's not something that we're turning over to the client. The develop branch is where we have our own local contribution, our own local commits are happening. In our case, the develop branch is also a preview environment. We don't use 3 separate branches, so develop is preview and local, and then we very carefully merge into master, and master is the live site. So going from develop into master is, in my mind, promoting the code from an environment that we're working on to something where we feel is complete. So Git is your friend. Let's separate the environments. I talked about these commands. The one I left out was branch. I think that you probably won't use branch as often as you use the other commands I've listed. Branching typically happens on a very limited basis. The way we work is the branches get created for us automatically when we create a new repo. And usually that branch is developed. And when we clone the code onto our own local system, we have an initial commit. It's in the develop branch. We can start coding. And when we do that, we add files, we do the changes, we commit those changes. I'm just representing each commit with a number. And at some point, we might be ready to take that feature set that we're comfortable with and branch it. And really all that means is I take an exact copy of the commit that I'm at in develop, and I start calling a series of commits by another name. We call it the master branch. So in this case, branch is a verb, and branch might be something that our client sees. We might continue to do work, and so we might continue to do additional commits, and these commits might come from the same person, they might come from different people, but we might get to a point where we have a commit that we're ready to show to the client. And at this point, I have to bring cats into the mix, because what would a presentation be like without cats? And you can think about the white cat as commit number 5 and the black cat as commit number 2. And what I'm really interested in showing here is the promotion from develop into master from our local environment into our live environment. And so what we're really trying to do is show how we use the git merge command to bring forth all of the changes that we have made in that git number, commit number 5, that was the white dot, into the master branch. And so you can think about this as the promotion process. The left-hand side is the develop branch. That can be whatever environment you choose to be, local, dev, preview, staging, test, whatever you're calling it. And then the master branch is our live production. You can also think about a picture with 5 boxes of cats in them as well, and many different branches and many different environments, whatever works for you. We don't like to complicate things. So once that change set has been completed and we've merged from develop into master, we now effectively have an exact copy of what we had in develop in live. And we have the same cat in both places. And what's important to notice here is that there's a straight line from 2 to 5. And no one's done any work on the live site. And so the point up here, the white dot, 5 live now, is exactly the same as 5 in the develop branch. If there was a hotfix or someone was on the live site and needed to make a change of some sort that had to be done right away, then there would probably be another dot over here, and that would indicate another set of changes to the files in the live environment. And then the white dot up there wouldn't be all white. It might be light gray. it would be a combination of the white dot in the develop branch and the changes that were made on the live side. You should try not to do that. And yeah, Jack laughs because I do that still, and he's our ops guy, and I get a lot of flack about it, but you really shouldn't do that. The right way to do it is to make the changes that are not in live, and then go through the rigorous process, because if you screw up, then there's a way of going back. If you do it in live, and I edit a file that might be ignored, that is different only in the live side, then I've lost those changes and Git doesn't know about them, and that's bad. And so the summary or the summary here is merge locally, pull globally. You definitely never want to merge on live. You should never be switching branches or doing anything weird in live. You can merge anywhere else, preferably locally. Sometimes merges are hard and require CPU. That makes things easier. Most of the often, that's not the case. You really are protecting yourself from live, so merge locally and then pull globally. The workflow that we have at 10.7 is we work locally, we commit, and then we push to our central repo, and we have hooks that live on the server, post-update hooks, and then what those hooks do is they take any of the changes that have just been committed, and they force a pull of those changes into our preview environment, where there's a working directory, a snapshot of the latest code, and anytime you push, you can guarantee that your code is then in your preview environment. So, a summary of point number 2. Think about merges as promotions. Going from branch to branch is like going from environment to environment. So a branch is actually an environment. Think about the fact that each environment has its own head, and so that represents a snapshot of a particular commit on a particular branch. And so the very tip of the master branch in the live environment is a snapshot. The very tip of the branch in develop is a snapshot, and that might be in your preview side. And this is great for files. It really is. There is no other way to do this in my mind. The problem is that we don't live with a CMS that only works in files. Drupal uses a database, and databases are incredibly powerful. And they are also alive. So when you have a database and you are powering the site that you're building, that thing is changing constantly. And once you deploy it to the live environment, that change and those changes are completely out of your control. Because now you've deployed the site, you've put it out on the web, and people are now using the site. And people are submitting web forms, and people are actually adding content and managing it and doing whatever else they're doing with your site. And so the general rule of thumb is you only ever get to deploy a database once. If you're deploying it more than once, you're probably doing something wrong. If you think that you can have a site that is up, that is continually up, and you can deploy a database to update that site, you are wrong. If you want if you want uptime, if you are okay with 24 hours of downtime, then by all means, you should put your site into maintenance mode, make an exact copy of the database, make sure no one uses it while it's in maintenance mode, make all your changes locally, test it, update the database in live, and go back out of maintenance mode. But the reality is we don't do that. It's not okay for a site to be down for 24 hours, or for an hour, for half an hour. And so we have to let those databases live on their own. We deploy them once. Luckily, databases can be represented as text files, so we can make a backup of a database. And when we do that, the way we work at 10.7 is we actually have a copy of the database in our repo. Now, that's okay when you're working on smaller sites where you perhaps don't have such a large amount of content. It's a really nice feature because I know that the last time I deployed to the preview environment, there was an exact snapshot of files, but there was also an exact snapshot of a database. And any developer that clones that repo can create that instance of that database on their local machine. But it really is only helpful during the development cycle, and once you go live, it's no longer very useful. Also, if the database is a gigabyte or 2 gigabytes or really large, it makes no sense to keep it in the repo. And as a result, you end up realizing that databases are actually really hard to manage. And so, how do we do that? How do we fix that? How do we get around it? What happens if we've launched a site and our client now asks us to build a new feature, and one of the things that the new feature entails is a new content type? Well, you can add the content type locally, and you can commit your changes, and you can make a snapshot of the database and use the latest live database and push it to preview, and then the client will see the new content type on the preview side. And then you could probably get that approved, and then you could look at the content type and then manually go onto the live site and manually recreate that content type with all the fields, with all the parameters, with all the whatever else there is. You can't redeploy the database. So what you do is you use the features module. The features module allows you to move things out of the database and into files, and therefore into Git, and therefore into different environments. And it allows you to move them between those environments. I've put here moves things into files. The actual definition is configuration, is fields, is content types, is many other things. And so I have some references here so you can have a look at those and see everything that it will support. But effectively what the features module gives you is a user interface on your site where you can say, okay, I'm going to create this new feature, and this new feature includes this content type and all the fields that are associated with that content type, and maybe a view. And maybe it's not just a view, it's a view and 3 content types. It is not going to take any data. It will not save any data. It will simply take all of the construct of the content type and of the view, extract it, and put it into a file. And what it does is it actually creates a module.
So when you say it will not take the data, it won't take the actual nodes that are in the content.
That's right, yeah.
But it will take, it's the data definition.
It's the data definition that it'll take. So if you've been screwing around with the content type on your local machine and you added 10 nodes, you can be safe that those nodes will be left behind.
Right.
But the actual structure and the definition of the fields and
the field,
yeah,
and all, what type of field.
what type of field it was, yeah, all of that,
Okay.
that'll all be brought with. And so the features module actually creates modules. So when you hit advanced options here, and there's a button here where you click, it says something like generate. Thanks. When you click on generate, what it does is it takes all of the things you checked and it creates a set of files that are defined as a module, and it dumps them in the location where you've specified in the input box on the server. Or you can download it. And it ends up being a zip file that has the name of the module that you gave it, and what ends up happening is you put it in your Git repo, and you add it, and you commit it, and you push it. And so now all of these things that you selected and that you configured locally that are in the database go into a file and into a set of files. And that's really awesome because you can now control them and promote them. And once you've done that, you effectively have a new module with those things that were previously in a database, in a file. Once you've pushed it, you can get it into your live environment. Now it's just a module in your live environment. It isn't doing anything because it's not enabled. It hasn't affected your site in any way yet. And when you go to the UI on your live site, you can now enable this module, hit save, and when you enable the module, it will create all of the things that you created locally on the live site. And so it will create the content type. If you put content types in the module or in the feature, it will create all the views, and it will use the information that's in the files to define them. And at that point, you can go to the live site and you will see those content types and those roles and those views and so on. And that's really slick, because now not only have I not had any downtime, I've been able to quantify the configuration that was previously in my database in a file. And as a result, I can make changes to those features locally and recreate that module and save it again locally. And what that ends up doing is it just makes changes to the files locally, which are just Git change sets that you can add and commit and push. And so once you've made those changes locally, because you've shown this now on the live site, and perhaps there are additional tweaks, maybe you need to add another field to the content type, you do that on your local machine. You recreate the feature. So you go back here, and if it's another field or another content type, if you made whatever change, you make those edits, you regenerate that module, it updates those files, you push it up, and once it's in the live environment, what you have to do is you have to update or revert. Revert. That's right. I never get those two right.
Because it says revert, but it really is
But
updating.
it's because it says revert and it really is updating. And okay, so now this is how I think about it. You are reverting to the files that you just pushed. Because what happens with the feature is it takes all those things in the files and it puts them in the database, right? So when you push the feature and you enable it, it takes those descriptions and it puts them in your database. And so now your database and your files are describing exactly the same thing, but Drupal uses the definition that's in the database. So when you push a new set of files that describe that feature, you have to tell Drupal to revert to those files and update itself. When you use features update, what you're saying is take any changes I made in the database and put them in the files. And you might do that if you made changes to your content types on the live site. So you should never do that, but sometimes that happens. It happens. When it happens, it happens a lot. When those changes happen on the live site, you have to be able to capture them. And so features update puts it back into the files. And once you've done that and you've been able to successfully promote and get all these things up, and then you don't have to worry about ever redeploying a database again, and everybody's really happy. And those are two links that you should probably look at if this interests you further. Obviously the features module itself, and then the Bay Area camp in 2012 had a really nice presentation on features as well, so I would recommend that. So to wrap it all up, Git is your friend. Think about using Git and branching to separate environments, and use features to get any configuration changes that are in your database into files so that you can leverage these first two things that I talked about.
When you guys are building your features, how fine-grained or coarse-grained do you make them? Do you have like one content type for a feature, or do you bundle up views and content types at the time?
That's a very good question, because it is an ever-evolving discussion that we have internally, and it's always different. And I think that we struggle with that all the time, because you could put one content type in a feature, and that would make sense. But you could also package the views in a separate feature, and that would make sense. I personally think about things that work together as being things that could be bundled together, and so I would call that a feature. So I might put the views and the content types together in one feature. But we do have a project now that we're working on that has a large number of features, and I don't know how I feel about it right now, but there's a little bit of nodding and a little bit of shaking of heads.
Well, so we tried to keep the views all together to begin with, but then we realized there's 30, 40 views on the site, and we don't want them all in one feature. So we try to move those to, like, say they're blog posts. We want the views for blog posts to be in the blog post feature, and we've kind of reorganized it that way.
So I found that the best thing is to have as many as possible. So if you have 40 views, sometimes it's 40, sometimes it's 20. But the thing that trips me up a lot is required modules. So when you have a view that shows content of a content type, you'll create the feature of the content type first, and then the view will require the content type. So you create dependencies within the features. And you can actually go back in and hand code some of that stuff and take some of those out to make it easier for you to maintain those. But sometimes, it's a bad analogy, but it's like a house of cards, because you have things you build on, and then you have content types, and now you have views, and now you have blocks.
And roles and permissions.
And things are stacked on top of each other, and pretty soon if you want to change something, everything is required of it. So it really takes a little bit of experience just to go in and make some features and figure out what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes take out those required lines so that you can move things around, because it gets tricky.
And you're right, it's just a module. Each feature is just a module. And you can go into the info file and you can change the requirements so that if you're not unchecking the box and you're having some dependency hell, you can go in there and actually just remove that line that requires that module.
It seems like magic. It seems like magic in the sky, but it really is just building Drupal modules. And you can go in and just see exactly what they're doing and that's it.
I remember when we first started using features, it was like, oh my god, this is the best thing that we've ever done in our lives. Yeah.
When you pull after somebody else has done a feature, how do you tell the rest of the team to make sure to go in and enable that module or revert or whatever you're supposed to do?
I don't know how we tell each other. It's usually IM, and I think most of the there's no best practice. Most of the time, when you do something and you see that it's not working, you'll either bang your head against it for 10 minutes and then realize that you need to do a feature revert. But hopefully, whoever's done that update will let you know. Usually, there's a to-do in Basecamp that gets checked or something like that.
So then. I guess the one problem I had with this, as you mentioned, is what happens if somebody else creates, and they add a new field on a live site, on a production site, and you can't revert. So then when you update, it adds it to the code. That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
But then the best practice would not be to commit code from the live site, because that's on a different branch. So you wouldn't want to mess with that workflow, or the Git flow. So, do you guys usually do you bring down the live database to your local one and then make
Yes. So that's what Jack does a whole lot of. Is if we're going to start on a new feature that maybe we've worked with a client and we haven't touched it in a long time,
Sure.
we'll make a snapshot of the database, and that will update the features that exist as well. I forget that it's not a standard Drupal database dump. It's a set of commands that allow you to update the features as well. So you get the database, you get the features updated, then you commit all of that to master, so that you now have the starting point. You commit that and you push that back to your central repo, and then you pull. And then what Jack will typically do is he will have that local instance installed as well, and at that point he will merge master into develop. Do that commit and push back to the central repo, so now develop and master are at exactly the same place. So then when a developer has to start again, they can just do a pull, and develop will then be at the same place that master is, which is where the live environment is.
I feel like when we're
Yeah.
done making like a change to a project, then for me, like the repo's in good shape if both master and develop are at the same state and there's like a recent database dump in there.
I'm at the University of Minnesota, and our production is hosted on IMHO.
Mhm.
And we that use a module, the university uses a module called SAML login for authentication, and then that takes all our sugar logins, so it's a
Yep.
single sign-on. The local development environments, I've been told we do not need to enable SAML login for that. So you actually have, different, there's always going to be that difference in the database between those two.
Yep.
And so, my question is, what are your suggestions for best practices with that, since, some of this permission stuff and the user stuff does include stuff.
Third parties. That's
Yeah.
that's a good question as well, and that's tough to answer. I think it really depends on the complexity of the install. If it's a smaller site, maybe it's a microsite in your case, where there perhaps isn't a whole lot of features and modules that are enabled, then maybe getting in a snapshot of the live site and switching off locally those modules that make sense to switch off is the right way to do it.
Okay.
If it's a more complex site, and we're working with actually the project we were talking about just a while ago, we typically don't do database imports from the live site at all because they're so large and because the instance is so complex. And so we'll keep the local environment on each developer's machine as working as, as enabled and functional as possible, and then we'll manually go in and make changes as we need to. Sometimes we have to do the import, but we try not to do it if it's more complex. That's how we've done it.
All right.
And then we also use a module called Stage File Proxy. If you know about it, it's a really useful module because you don't have to have, if you have a site that's really heavy on the number of files, you don't have to have a copy of all those files locally. So Stage File Proxy will rewrite all the URLs on your local or staging instance and point them to the files on the live instance over HTTP. So when you bring up the front page or you click on a download link, it'll know that that's actually where it's meant to go.
My computer just screamed joy.
I think I heard it.
What does your actual production deployment sort of look like? So on the day you're going to production, you gotta do a git pull, you've gotta update the database, you gotta do your reverts, bunch of drush stuff, some manual things, your settings that PHP. How do you guys do it?
Okay, so this is how we do it. We have one settings file, so the general rule of thumb is don't put anything that's configuration based in your repo, ever. We break that rule in one instance. And that instance is our own development environment on our server that we call preview. And the reason for that is we have the credentials for our username and password for the database that's in the preview environment in the repo, so that when a developer pushes, the update hooks pull into that preview environment, and then we have another hook that runs that actually deploys the database that's in the repo to the preview environment's database. And I had to tell you about that to tell you how we treat other environments. The settings.php file has a line in it that looks for a local file that's in the same location where the settings.php file is. And that settings.local.php file is ignored by Git. So settings.local.php never gets committed to Git. And what that means is if there is a settings.local.php file in whatever environment, it will override settings.php. So when a developer starts a new site up, all they have to do is create settings.local.php, and it will point to their local instance. And that file will never get committed, so no one will ever know those credentials. And same for any other developer, and the same actually for the production environment. So there'll be a settings.local.php file in the production environment, and that will contain just the live production database information so that the live production site can connect to the live production database. So when we push to production, we've merged all of our content, merged all of the files from develop into master. We have a release that we're happy with. We push that to the central repo. Depending on the size of the deployment, we may or may not put the site into maintenance mode. We typically won't. We will go into the, we'll SSH into the live environment, and we'll do a git pull in master, and that'll bring down all the changes that we've made, that we've tested, that we're happy with. And if it's just files and it's just styles, for example, we'll do a drush cc all and clear all the caches, and that will bring up the new styles that we're done. If there are changes to features that already exist, then all the features modules that we created come with that change commit, right? So at that point, nothing's live yet. We have to go into the admin interface on the live site and then revert to those changes that are in the files, which effectively then update the live site. And at that point, maybe we're done, maybe we're not.
Aren't there drush commands for that?
There are drush commands for that.
That's where we.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can do it either way. And then that's pretty much it, right?
Sometimes if we are ignoring all files, then we need to do a file sync from, let's say, our local environment or a previous environment to the live environment. That's oftentimes, if let's say there's a lot of large images, we don't want those to be tracked in our Git repo because that would just make it a ridiculous size. And so then those are all ignored by Git, but we just do a file sync from the environments to get them up.
So that's actually a good point. So all of the files that we have in site's default files are ignored. And so that's not really a problem when you're first developing the site because most of the images are in the theme folder, so you're fine. But after a site's been around for a long time, we will rsync or use a command that we customize that pulls those files from different environments or pushes them from. So we've got something called T7 pull and T7 push. And what that does is it effectively does an rsync of files that are in the site's default folder from one environment to another.
Using drush aliases, you can set up drush aliases to say, here's this environment, and here's the credentials for that, and that's a file that lives within the repo. And so then you can do things like, that's a whole different spectrum.
That's
But it's, you can do environment-specific drush commands, so you can say, like, I don't know the exact format, you can say, like, drush cc all at live. And from your local environment in the repo, that will clear the cache out of the live environment.
And what we really use it for is pushing files or pulling files from live to local or from live from local to staging or whatever. That's what we do with the files.
I think you pretty much said this, but just to be clear, your actual live environment on the server has a .git folder and is a.
Oh yeah, so I didn't mention that at all, and just exactly what you said. So the fact that we are able to pull from a Git repo onto a live site means that the live site and the public HTML folder where the site is being served from is a fully functional Git repo. So it has every single commit and every single change and every single branch of everything we've ever done.
And all past databases too.
Yeah, if you put them in there, yeah.
You do it.
Yes, technically they're in the, yes.
Security thing?
No.
I mean, no, because if someone's already there on the folder and can see those databases, then they can see our settings PHP file, and at that point they have the live database anyway. So
One thing to note is that we don't really care, once it's in a live environment, I only care about the master branch. If developed, let's say there's errors, we're pushing it, I don't care, because the live site's never going to be on the develop branch, it's only going to be on master branch.
but technically, you've still got everything there. The .git folder is there.
And your server, through your Drupal configuration, is going to protect your settings like PHP.
Denial.
Yeah. So it's just files that are showing, not everything else that's in that Git. Just the current version of the Git.
In the public HTML. Yes.
How do you handle pushing content that you might have added to the staging environment and show the client and they've approved and now they want that content added to the live site?
We actively avoid doing that because we have found no good way to get that content from a preview environment to a live environment. And so we'll actively encourage our clients to make those changes on the live side. And you can have them, if you truly are talking about content that you don't want someone to see, you just don't publish the nodes, and you publish them when you're ready. Or if you have Workbench installed, you use that workflow.
So you would build on the content on the live site.
Like, blocks would work with features though, right? So
Blocks,
like a
you can
custom
export block. If you've got a custom block, you put that in a
just
feature.
finding nodes or anything.
Yeah. I think there is, there was a extension or there was something that we used to export content once. And we thought, oh, this is going to be great. But
It's buggy.
yeah, it
There's
didn't work.
also deploy module, which uses services module as well, where you can have kind of a staging site and push and pull content that way via a REST API. But we've experimented with it only locally, but it's not something we're comfortable doing with clients yet.
If your nodes are simple, they don't have a lot of node references, it works great.
Yeah.
Node export works great,
But that's never the case.
it's never the case.
Especially if they're images or references or something.
It'll do images, but I found that node references really
Hard.
are tough.
Do you have a question?
Does the features module, does that do panels as well?
I don't know. Does features do panels?
We don't know.
We don't.
I don't do panels.
No, we don't. So I don't know.
I would assume that it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I was wondering this anyway, views and I assume panels, that has the chaos tools in for it. Does features use that or is that a separate use?
I do not know the answer to that either.
I know that features hooks into Panelizer.
So
That's
chances
a little
are.
different, but still.
Chances are good.
How about the regular core updates? How do you handle that? Do you just format as part of your other deployments? Because it's like every time I look at my website, I have updates. I don't know. It's so easy to just say, yeah, update.
It is, isn't it? It's so easy.
Check them out.
No, don't do that. No. So here's what we do.
That was like my first week I did that.
Yeah. So we start by making a snapshot of live. Commit to master, put it into develop, pull locally. So in theory, this is how I think we do it. I'm pretty sure this is how Coleman and Jack do it, but they can own up to whether or not that's the case. They will then do a drush up locally. And in some cases, if you do it often enough, it's a breeze. Sometimes there's like 10 modules you have to update, and if it's an older version of Drupal 6, or Civi CRM is involved, or there's some weird combination of modules, then you have to do the drush updates on each module independently of each other, and you have to test and make sure that it works. Once you, what's that?
Testing it locally.
Locally, right, testing it locally. Once you've done that and you can do a drush up successfully like that, then you commit that and you merge it into master and you push it to your central repo. At that point, I'm not comfortable pulling that into master, into the live environment without putting it into maintenance mode. Because if I'm pulling changes to core and the site's running, I'm going to run into issues. So we put the site into, I mean, I'm hoping this is what happens, but pretty sure.
We don't ever put that in.
I know you've done that before, though.
Maybe once.
Okay, we should be putting it into maintenance mode then. And pulling it into live, and then running drush up DB, because you want to make sure that any schema changes that came with those updates locally actually make it to the database over on live. So that drush up DB is very important to run in the live environment after you've pulled.
Do you try to keep those separate from other changes? Do you have kind of a cap that's just kind of?
They're their own commits, different commits.
When I do a drush up, I try to do a commit for every module, but sometimes that's unreasonable to expect.
Do it in batches.
Should never do it on live. And
You should never do it on live. Well,
I mean, because, right, well, first you probably should be working in a branch, right?
absolutely. you
And
should.
then if you totally screwed up, you can start your branch
Yep.
over. But it really helps to have every module, because you'll do some checking, and it looks like everything's okay. And then you'll come back later, and if you keep every module in its own commit, you can uncommit, or you
Yeah, you can revert.
you can revert that commit and keep all the other ones, and take that module out, and then build another release from that, and then
Push it
you're
up.
back up in a reasonably short amount of
I
time.
agree.
So,
And once you do an update DB on live, you cannot revert that code back because the schema changed.
That's true. And so just before you do that, you should make a backup of the database. Because if you screwed it up, then you can revert to the backup.
And lose whatever content.
No, because you're in maintenance mode.
Oh, okay. Maintenance. Until you find out.
Until you find out that 10.7 isn't
doing
doing maintenance mode.
mode.
But we do
There's
it
also-
for you though. We actually have a client in the room. So,
and there's also doing it at 3 a.m. rather than at
Yeah.
2:30 in the afternoon, right?
that's true.
Big difference. So,
I like that idea. 3 a.m.
so one of you trolls are going to be working at 3 a.m. now. Sorry.
Thanks, Wilbur.
Well, that's why you have one of your team in Germany or something.
Yes, or
Don't
London.
send me to church.
Yes.
It's like you're kicked out of the country. I have another question about features.
Yes.
So we're using strong arm as well.
Yes.
It's pretty cool.
Mhm.
I find myself getting into the strong arm section and starting like adding things, and it seems like I never know when to stop. And there's the whole thing, do I add bundle settings?
He has a lot of experience with that. Lex does.
Yeah, well, I would add those bundle settings to what the feature that has that bundle. So if it's like a blog content site, you put those bundle settings in that blog, because you're gonna want those settings to carry over the label names, all that stuff. Those are settings you're gonna want in all your environments. So I would do that.
So do you go through strong arm and just try to get everything that's related to what's in there?
Just because sometimes clients are like, oh, we want this label to say something different. You know, we call it blog post, but it should be blog entry or something like that. Easy to update. It's like that everywhere. You know, and just change it in the database. It's in code.
Yeah.
And one thing I didn't mention is that, and I don't know very much about it, but I do know that features is different in Drupal 8. There's a lot of the functionality of what features does for you in Drupal 7 that's been baked into Drupal 8, and so features has a different role in Drupal 8. And I honestly don't know
The session
very much
earlier
about it.
today that Matthew Tiff did covers that. So I think he has the slides up. I don't know.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
No? Okay. Oh, I have one more slide.
There was at Drupal Camp Boston, there was a great presentation by Dixon. His username is Dixon, Dick Olson from Scandinavia, and he did an excellent presentation on node export in Drupal 8, which promises to be very
Right. He's the maintainer of the, what I was talking about earlier, the deploy module, currently in Drupal 7. Yeah, Drupal 8 sounds promising for staging content and content.
Much easier.
sites. Yeah, and inline.
So last slide, don't forget Advantage Labs Friday night party. That's tonight in T-minus 70 minutes. Starts at 6 o'clock and it's just down the street on Lundale, right by the Minneapolis Farmers Market. So please join us. I'm sure it'll be fun. And then there's a wallet here. I'm going to take it to Lost and Found, but
Somebody's been furiously twittering that they lost the wallet.
oh, is it?
Has his phone number.
Is his name John Mayfield?
What's his address?
What's his credit card number?
He's from Texas.
How much money?
Oh, I met John at lunch today. All right.
I have his wallet, so I will hold on to it. And maybe we can figure out who he is from Twitter, and we can figure a meeting out. But you're not here, John. Okay, great. Thank you very much. See you at the party.